Gambling doesn't look like it used to. It's not smoky casinos or slot machines anymore. It's an app on your phone, a free bet, a push notification during the game you are already watching. And that's why so many people don't realize they are at risk until the stress, secrecy, and financial pressure start showing up in their lives and relationships. Today, we're talking about online gambling and sports betting, how it's changed, why it feels normalized, and how quickly it can move from entertainment to something much heavier. Joining me today is Adrian Cossum from Gambling Support of BC, an organization that works directly with individuals and families navigating gambling challenges. Adrian is a counselor who has specialized in gambling problems for the past 17 years. She works on contract with Gambling Support BC, which provides free support and counseling to residents of British Columbia with concerns about gambling. In addition to working as a counselor, Adrian also produced and hosted a podcast for 4.5 years called Fold'em, Help for Gambling Problems. We're breaking down the myths, the warning signs people often miss, and how gambling impacts relationships and finances, and most importantly, what real support and recovery can look like. Because whether you gamble, love someone who does, or just wants to understand the risks in today's digital world, this is a conversation we need to be having. Adrian, thank you so much for coming on today's episode of Her Energy Unlocked. I'm so excited to have you here.
Mandeep, thanks so much for the invitation and for your interest.
People follow me on Instagram. They know I love sports. I watch a lot of sports, and I noticed during last year's playoffs, hockey playoffs, the normalization of betting and having trusted individuals talking about it. And I even myself started participating in some of the betting, and it got me thinking, like, it was fun. Oh yeah, let's bet on this game and all of that. But then it got me thinking about how this can really be a slippery slope because of the dopamine hit you get when you do win. So I caught myself on that, but it was so different because I think gambling, or most people think gambling, is going to Vegas and sitting at a casino table or at a slot machine, and it's changed. So before we get into all of that and the digital world, can you tell me a little bit about Gambling Support of BC and the services your organization provides?
Gambling Support BC is a program that's funded through the provincial government. There's similar programs in all provinces across Canada. And, its mandate is to provide help and information to people like you who stepped into gambling, or they have a loved one who has. They've got some concerns. They've got want some questions answered. We're here to provide some information and help, particularly for those for whom it's creating problems. And it's a free service available to residents of BC. Can access it through in-person appointments in some communities, but absolutely video or phone calls or sessions as well.
If you're listening and you don't live in the province of BC and live in other parts of Canada or in the US, in the show notes, I will have additional resources for you to be able to access, get additional information. So who typically reaches out to your services, and what kind of support do they usually need?
Typically, people are reaching out to us when gambling is creating some stress and problems, right? So perhaps you're, like you said, for yourself, you stepped into betting, it started off fun and innocent enough. Perhaps over time, more likely, it's showing up with creating some stresses. It's, for most people, it's not an easy step to reach out for help. And so usually people who are reaching out to us, they've been going around in the cycle with gambling for themselves or someone they care about for quite a long time. And they get to a point where enough is enough, and they would do something different, because it's a tricky problem to manage on your own. So I commend people for taking that courageous step.
What are some common misconceptions people have about gambling addiction?
Well, I think, like you said, I think we all carry stereotypes in our head of what gambling addiction looks like. And for most of us, it's not an accurate stereotype, right? Like you said, it's that idea of some older person in a casino or somebody gambling daily, or maybe they've hit rock bottom. We have an image of somebody perhaps losing their house. But the reality is that gambling looks different these days, and gambling problems look really different. Have a gambling problem, it doesn't mean that you're gambling daily. You could be binge gambling. It doesn't mean that you've hit rock bottom. The norm with, particularly gamblers in their early 20s is that it just progressively goes on and on year after year, slowly holding that person back, kind of financially and developmentally. And so the key here is that for gambling to show up as a problem, it's not really how often you gamble or how much you spend. The key is what kind of stresses and problems is it creating in your life and or for the lives of the people who care about you.
And are there often warning signs that people ignore when it comes to gambling addiction?
Absolutely. It's a bit of a sneaky, creepy problem, right? So it moves in slowly. Typically people, like you said, Mandy, start off gambling socially, right? So you're watching a game socially, somebody invites you to make a bet on something. The signs that it's shifting is now often that it's something that you're doing on your own and something that you're probably not talking to people about, something that you're spending increasing amounts of time thinking about. When can I do this? How will I get money to do it? Oh crap, how can I recoup the losses? And you're also finding yourself, upping the ante a bit, more and more time, more and more amounts of money. And it's just keeps creeping in like that. But the trickiness with this problem is that it creates a bit of short-term focus. So it's hard to step outside the big picture and look, oh my gosh, over the last year, this is how my gambling has changed. It just keeps you locked into today or the next bet.
So are there particular age groups that or demographics that are more at risk?
Absolutely. The big one to pay attention to is young adults. So we're looking kind of 18 to 24, 18 to 30, particularly because of brain development, right? So the brain in that age group not as able to kind of manage impulses. It's not as able yet kind of forecast and play out how's this going to play out long term. So you introduce that brain development factors with gambling, it's more risk there for sure. The other ones, and this it's just seniors. If you look at the demographics around gambling problems, the numbers are also a little higher in seniors. Particularly casino gambling can be a way to kind of ease some difficulties in life, right? When I'm there, I'm around people. When I'm on the machines, I'm not feeling my pain. That's emotional or physical as much. As with all gambling, there's a lot of marketing and incentives to keep it going.
The cruise industry really promotes that if you gamble on their ships, then you get a better deal on the cruise. Is the cruise a better deal because you're spending so much now at the casino? But how has gambling changed with the rise of online casinos, apps, and sports betting platforms?
You've noticed it, right? Just watching sports. Yeah, the gambling has shifted from concrete and mortar buildings to we all carry around casinos or gambling venues on our devices. When you have increased access and ability to do it, absolutely it's going to change gambling behaviors. The other thing is there's a huge marketing industry that has been growing and growing and growing, whether that's you're getting notifications on your phone or your device inviting you, offering you this deal, bonuses, free bets. The marketing is also being carried with you 24/7. And it's a factor with increasing risk. The other thing is just, wow, like over the last 10, 15 years, there's been this explosion of online gambling. And it's just so normal, particularly now, to be associated with sports, right? It ups the ante of entertainment fun if you're betting while watching sports. And so that's largely because of legal changes. So in Canada in 2021, legalized it so single game bets are allowed. In the United States, just before that, court decisions allowed individual states to regulate and legalize gambling. So as a result, we've seen a lot more opportunities to gamble, and then the marketing comes with that.
Watching sports, and there's always a segment now, a part of the sports analyst talking about what the betting odds are. And so that to me is really eye-opening because it's kind of like normalized behavior. What makes online gambling more riskier than traditional gambling?
Well, I think what the research tells us is that anytime the speed, the pace of making a bet is faster, the risk increases. And so with online gambling, you have access to it more quickly. And often people are playing activities now that move faster, right? So let's say in contrast with a poker game, it's naturally going to have a slower down speed compared to slots. Or now with in-game betting, there's the pace of it. And when there's the pace, you've got increased problems. The other thing is the solitary nature of it, right? If you're around people, there's just inevitably a little bit more opportunities to pull yourself out. It's just you and your device. There's more of a risk because it's just you immersed in the gambling activity.
Why is sports betting particularly appealing to people who don't see themselves as gamblers?
Similar, I think, to poker here. It's that there's an element which can really kind of form quite a strong belief is that there's an element of skill, right? What we know is that there's perhaps more risk for young males who know a lot about sports, or females, but the profile tends to be riskier for males. I know a lot about sports. I'm a really competitive person. I'm really good at stats and numbers. And so this idea takes hold. I'm good at this, and so particularly if there's an early win, boy, that belief really gets entrenched. And so I think that's one thing that's appealing. The other is just this idea to let's amp up the experience. So watching sports isn't enough. Let's amp up the experience. And so it just makes it a little bit more appealing to the public.
During last year's playoff run, Stanley Cup playoff run, one of the goalies in the finals put out like a statement that he was receiving death threats. And there's an article that was correlating those sort of death threats to actual betting, and how, because maybe people have put a lot of money on the line and are blaming a particular player for losing that particular game, and inadvertently that person who made the bet losing a lot of money, which is very, very scary to know. What are some of the common myths about sports betting that can lead people to underestimate risk?
I think that people, when they're gambling, overestimate the extent to which skill or strategy is having an impact on the outcome. So again, coming back to sports bettors, there's an overestimating of the extent to which their research and their knowledge of certain players or certain sports are going to be an advantage to them. You combine that with, that the companies running gambling are using really sophisticated data models, right? And market information. So you're balancing out your assessment of your own ability with that, combined with the reality and the challenge of gambling is that it's not just a logical, planned process. Particularly when a loss happens, betting becomes very emotional. And this is where folks who are moving into problem gambling find themselves, is that they lose, and then they're making these impulsive emotional decisions over and over again, perhaps betting on something they don't know as much about, or an impulse bet. And now that you can see the hole is getting dug over time.
How can people assess their own risk before gambling becomes a problem?
So one thing I like to just share with people is again, the research tells us that it isn't an even playing field in the public in terms of where there is more risk as you step into the world of gambling. So what I see regularly with the people that I work with is that we know that there is more risk for if you engage in gambling and you live with ADHD, depression, or anxiety. If you also live with pain or chronic health issues, there's more risk. For a young person who grew up in a family where you were exposed to gambling, gambling was normalized. If you have a history of addictions in your family, there's a genetic component there. All of these things, even before you place your first bet, are creating more risk for you to have a gambling experience, gambling behavior that can get out of control.
What conversation should families be having about sports betting and online gambling?
Yeah, I love this question because, as you said, it's awareness, awareness, awareness. And I mean, just to even start with the basics about gambling, which is the house always has an advantage. Yeah. And so even with activities that have a skill component, when you look over the long term, you're paying for that opportunity to gamble. It's guaranteed. And so if you look at your spendings over a longer period of time, pull yourself out of just the, yeah, but I won yesterday, you are paying a pretty predictable amount to gamble. And so it's going to be a losing venture for you. The other piece I think that can be helpful to talk about is that just like with substances, alcohol or drugs, smoking that we talk about, gambling changes the brain. And there's understandable reasons why it gets out of control for people. And when that happens, it's not just a matter of, use your willpower and just stop betting. It's a complicated thing. And so just being aware that for everyone, that when it gets out of hand, it's a tricky thing to pull out of, and it's not a weakness.
I've done some podcasts with therapists, and we talked a lot about addictions and how there's usually an underlying root cause there. So it's really important to reach out to services to try to get the help that you need to identify that one, you may have a gambling addiction, but on top of that, get under to the root cause of it. Why is this addiction taken over your life? Because there could be some underlying reasons. How does online gambling or sports gambling problems show up in relationships differently than other forms of gambling?
It's easier to hide, and just also not being aware that it can intensify pretty quickly for some people. Right. And because, there can be a lot of embarrassment or shame about that, it can lead to secrecy. Right. I'm not going to be talking about my losses. I'm going to be doing everything I can in private to kind of win that back. I think the other thing, the way it can show up is just, some of the signs that somebody is getting hooked into it, right? So maybe your partner's not just on their devices, but they're kind of just seem off. They're more distracted. They're more irritable. Maybe you sort of see these fluctuations in their mood. Yeah, these are the kind of ways that can just become apparent in relationships.
If somebody's listening right now and not sure if somebody in their life has an online or a gambling addiction, what are early relationship warning signs partners often miss?
One level you would kind of feel it, right? Like the person that you know is just a little bit different, right? They're a little bit more stressed or irritable. They're a little bit more secret, particularly around money and their time. Maybe a little more defensiveness is coming out. You might see swings, as I said, right? All of a sudden they're being generous with money, and then a week later there isn't enough money to cover certain bills or expenses. And there's lots of explanations around why that, and lots of kind of heat and pressures around, we got to fix this right now. Those are the things I'd be paying attention to.
Okay, Adrian, what is the first step that you suggest somebody who feels they may have a gambling addiction or somebody they know has a gambling addiction? What's the first step that they should take?
Yeah. And so I'll just say in the beginning, it's not easy to do because there's so many factors that keep pulling you back in, whether it's the incentive to come back, whether it's the desperate hope that this is the solution to fixing things. So I'll just say that off the top. But whatever you can do to just try and help yourself take a bit of a break. There's tools out there on the gambling sites. They're all mandated to have something like you can self-exclude, take a break, or sign out. Make it difficult for yourself to be able to transfer that money in. Anything you can do to just kind of clear your head. And when you have a space to clear your head, like you said, dig in and do some reflection, learn about gambling issues, listen to a podcast, research online. You've got the guts, call or just submit our online intake form to Gambling Support BC and have a conversation. Anything to pull out and kind of get clear in your head about this thing and come up with a bit of a plan to help yourself.
What type of supports do you offer for somebody who is struggling with gambling? If maybe I feel like I'm struggling with gambling, but I've finally have been told by my spouse I need help. What am I walking into, and what type of support services would I be receiving with your association, or which are common amongst the field?
With Gambling Support BC, you submit an online intake form, and typically you'll get a follow-up in a week. You can choose, if you're not ready to speak to a counselor, that just kind of feels like too much. We have outreach support workers, right? Things are a little bit more informal. You'd be getting, your choice, a phone call, an email, or a text. And they're just going to talk to you, right? They're not going to kind of lay a program on you, but they're just going to talk to you about what's been going on with your gambling. And what you get the benefit of is people who have, years and years of experience of helping people with these issues. There's a lot we've all learned and that we can share in terms of concrete strategies or just information about gambling problems. And if somebody chooses to come into counseling, whether it's because of your own gambling or somebody else's, same thing. You're going to start off with a phone call with somebody like me. We've just really come to understand this issue. And so you're not going to be getting judgment from us. We're somebody who's not in your inner circle. It's going to just be there with support, but with guidance.
What role do family and friends play in supporting somebody who's got a gambling addiction?
Yeah, I think it could be a really significant role, right? And so I think the research tells us is that in terms of preventing relapse, the extent to which you have a supportive person, family, friend in your life has a huge impact, particularly because they can often see signs that you're getting pulled back in before maybe you can see it in yourself. But I will just say it's tricky. Family members really are affected by this issue, right? And there's a lot of stress and worry and fear, whether you're a parent, whether you're a spouse, that's going to be coming up for you as your person is disengaged, irritable, right, creative. All that's going to bring up a lot of stuff inside of you. And so it can be challenging to be the supportive person you want to be. I'll just say, that's where it's often helpful to not only have family and friends on your support guidance team, and for the family and friends to also reach out for help. So they've got somewhere else to get help for all the emotions that are coming up for them.
Without breaching confidentiality, Adrian, can you share maybe a success story or a way your support or your organization support has made a difference to somebody or their family?
I'll just say, first of all, is for folks who are listening, particularly if you or a loved one is struggling with gambling, is that I will just say, we all see it all the time, how somebody pulls away from this problem and stays pulled away. It can be a bumpy road. It's not going to probably be a straight line of recovery, but absolutely it's doable. And so I just know this problem can take people into some pretty dark and trapped places. Suicide rates are higher amongst those struggling with gambling addiction. And so I just want to offer that message of hope to people. What I will say, though, is for those who are in a stuck corner, what I regularly experience in early contact with people is the relief that they experience by being able to unburden themselves and to talk about what they've been going through and holding to themselves in secret. It's such a relief to be able to talk to somebody, and you're not, it's not a family member. You're not so worried about how this is going to affect them. And then the relief that they experience as they, at their own pace, start to find other solutions to the problems that they're living with, right? Whether it's unmanageable debt, whether it's tension in their relationships, whether it's they're so stressed out they're having a hard time sleeping. We can usually find some other ways that they can cope and deal with that other than just more gambling. And boy, what relief can come fast. Absolutely.
Adrian, if listeners can take away one key message from this episode, what would it be?
Just to be aware that, for anywhere from 3% of the population up higher, it can be maybe as high as 11% in amongst younger adults. Gambling does get out of hand, and it can happen to any of us. And so just being aware of that, being aware that it is a complicated issue to pull out from. And so to try not to deal with it on your own. Do whatever you can to learn a bit more and reach out for help.
Before we wrap up today's episode, I want to leave you with a few questions to think about, not to judge yourself, but to check in with your habits, your relationships, or the loved ones of your life. Ask yourself, am I gambling for fun? Or is it starting to become a way to cope with stress or emotions? Do I feel comfortable being fully transparent about my gambling habits? Or is this secrecy creeping in? Has gambling ever caused tension in my relationships or my finances, even in small ways? And finally, would I recognize a sign if someone close to me or I was struggling with gambling? These aren't easy questions, but reflection is the first step towards awareness. Take a moment to honestly answer them for yourself or share them with someone you trust. Awareness is power, and it's how we can prevent gambling from quietly becoming a bigger problem. If you or someone you know needs support with gambling, check out the show notes for resources and links to get help. Adrian, I would like to thank you so much for your time. You provided so much insight to not only traditional gambling, but the new online gambling world that I'm sure the listeners who are listening today are at least going to be more aware. And that is the reason why I wanted to do this episode, because I do want to drive awareness to this, because I do think it is something that is going to be affecting our families a lot more in this digital world. So Adrian, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you subscribe and continue the conversation on Instagram or TikTok at Her Energy Unlocked Podcast. I cannot wait to hear from you. Until next time, remember, your energy is yours to reclaim, your story is yours to rewrite, and your next chapter is waiting. And I will see you in the next episode. Bye for now.